Oh, yeah. Why did Gerberding believe in prevenient grace? So, yeah, and I'm glad you put in a footnote about Walther's view disagreeing with that. So, prevenient grace, let's define that. And who's Gerberding, for those who don't know? He's the author of The Way of Salvation in the Lutheran Church, which is a fantastic book. It's the first book that our publishing house released. And it is a wonderful book. It's like an introductory book to Lutheran theology, especially in a kind of revivalist context, which he was working in during the Second Great Awakening. It's a really wonderful text. Anyway, but one of the things that you may notice is, and this is not just true of Gerberding, but this is true of Henry Eyster Jacobs as well, though Gerberding probably is a little more unclear on the issue in that particular work. They speak about prevenient grace, which is essentially the Arminian idea. So the Arminian idea of prevenient grace, thanks, Clay, basically says that God has this universal grace that he gives to everyone, and that universal grace that is given to everyone basically is enough to free our will that we can choose Christ. So that's basically the Armenian view. And yes, I recognize some Armenians are going to be like, well, that's not what I believe, because I know there are differences in the Armenian tradition as well, right? I know that there's Arminius, there's Wesleyan Arminianism. I am not an expert in Arminianism, but prevenient grace tends to be there. So prevenient grace essentially only means grace that comes before. You will find a number of Lutheran theologians who say things like there is prevenient grace, which essentially means there is grace that comes before conversion. That's all prevenient grace means. So if you do encounter that language in Lutheran theologians, don't necessarily think that it's exactly identical with what Arminians are saying. Now, you do find this on behalf of a lot of Lutherans in America when they first encounter Arminians, because they hadn't really, and a lot of the Lutheran work is dealing more so with Calvinism and Roman Catholicism. If you read like the 17th century guys, not really Arminianism so much. So because of that, when you look at a lot of the Lutherans in America interacting for the first time with, say, Wesleyans or Arminians, and the Wesleyans are, the Moravians, they're familiar with the Augsburg Confession. They're seeing what are similarities. So some of them think that we're basically Arminian in our view, because, hey, they're not Calvinists, and they also believe in this thing called prevenient grace. And this is what led to a lot of debate in the 19th century over the question of election into a Tuitu Fidei, which means election in view of faith, what that means. So what you have in the late 19th century in Lutheranism is a divide over this question of election and whether election is in view of faith or unto faith. And part of that was a question about conversion and whether the human will had any role to play in conversion, whether it's an active role or a passive role. So what you find are essentially three different positions. You find CFW Walther and Francis Pieper's position, which essentially says that election is unconditional. We are elected unto faith, and it's monergism from the beginning to the end. Okay, so positive election, in that even an unconditional election would be true unto salvation, but not any kind of unconditional election to damnation. They wouldn't even talk about election to damnation really at all. So that is the Waltherian view, the view of the Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Synod, the Synodical Conference more generally. Then you have what was the view that became basically the Arminian view. And you see this with some pietism. You even see hints of this in David Hollatz in the late Scholastic era as well. So when you look at those various authors who kind of grab onto that prevenient grace language in that way, they seem to be coming at it from a kind of Arminian perspective. What you find then in the middle, though, is what you find in Johann Gerhard, or you find in Revere Franklin Widener, or Charles Krauth as well seems to take this position, which is that election can be said in some sense to be in view of faith rather than unto faith. However, faith is a gift of God, and there is no active cooperation of the will in faith. So essentially, it's a non-resistance to the will of God. We are simply not resisting, but God is doing all of the active work. That seems to be where Gerberding kind of comes in on that, in that perspective. So, and if you look at Gerberding's major theological influences, the ones that he'll cite more than anyone else are three, which are Henry Eyster Jacobs, Charles Krauth, and Revere Franklin Widener. So, and that would have been all of their perspective. But there is one, I think, one sentence in there that does seem more of the Armenian view as well. So there is a variety there are a variety of ways of speaking within the Lutheran tradition on that particular question. You know, I would urge you to just look at the Formula of Concord itself and see what it says on the question of election. It's been often debated, but I think that to some degree we have to say we are monergists if we're going to be confessional tradition. And there is, I think, a little bit of room to that means, because I think even when you look at C.F.W. Walther and Francis Pieper, have a difference in the way that even they speak about this issue. So yeah, there's some room for debate, I think, about what is taught exactly in the formula in that point.